Welcome. Thank you for putting up with our sauna here. We appreciate. We're just all so fired up to see Pam. Before I introduce the main event this evening, though, I do want to talk a little bit about this year's theme. As Nancy mentioned, last year, we launched One Book, One Littleton with the idea of engaging and connecting with community. This year, we wanted to focus on a sense of place and what place means to us, both the physical and the emotional. This year, the library's theme for summer reading was Find Your Place at the Library. And as we started to discuss the options for authors to come and present this year's One Book, One Littleton, we narrowed in on Pam Houston very quickly because she really exemplifies that connection to place. And nowhere more so than in her book, Deep Creek, when she talks about not just being in a geographic place, but truly making that place her own. And the way that she connects the emotional reality of her past with the physical reality of her present, the way, as she says, that her place has helped to heal and to help grow. And so we were really delighted when Pam said that, yes, she would be available to come and visit Littleton. We're very lucky. We got her right on the end of a trip abroad, and so she came straight over here from the airport to join us. Not today. She got in late last night, but still, she stopped here in Littleton before she made it back up to the mountains. And so we are very lucky that we were able to bring in such a wonderful author. So please join me in welcoming Pam Houston.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Lauren. My friend Lauren came from a long way away to be here tonight. In any case, the truth is, the fact of this reading made 3 extra days in Iceland justifiable. So it worked out for me. Yes, I've just come back from Iceland and Greenland, and it's just after midnight, so I'm not doing too bad. Just after midnight inside my body. But I'm really happy to be here. We had a nice class this afternoon that some of you were in, and always nice to be back in the mountains, and tomorrow I get to see all my animals, and so I'm excited about that. I want to tonight talk to you about this book, Deep Creek, which I'm so grateful. Oh, look, we got a piece of machinery that might put some photos up there. We'll see. I want to talk to you a little bit about the making of Deep Creek and how it became a book and how this story became mine to tell. And then I'm going to read to you a little from Deep Creek. And then what I hope is that we will have a conversation about whatever really you want to talk about. And as I said, someone was here with a Bronco shirt on. I hope he went home to watch the game. I know, having been a Bronco fan a lot of my life, I know that you're here and not watching the game. So I appreciate that too. In any case, so no. Oh, no, I'll do it. We'll do it right now because it's pretty pictures of the ranch and you'll be happy to see them. Yay! Okay. Great. Okay. Should we turn off the light? Yes, we can. It's more important that you see them than me. There we go. Okay. All right. See, they always say never bring an animal on stage with you because they'll steal the show. Okay. So these are just going to run. These are all photos of the ranch, and they're just going to run. He's like, don't you touch that microphone. Sorry, lost my mind. And just over the years, some of them are good quality, some of them aren't such good quality, but you'll get the gist of the ranch by looking at them. In any case, Okay, now you're going to have to stop oohing and ahhing. So this book, the story that's in this book began when I was, a long, long time ago, when I was in graduate school at the University of Utah, and I wrote as my dissertation thesis a book called Cowboys Are My Weakness. It was short stories. I conceived of myself at that time as only a short story writer. I was in graduate school. Of course, I didn't know what I was. But I wrote this book called Cowboys Are My Weakness. And when I got to the University of Utah, I was told by my professors that there were certain rules of writing. And the rules were no mountains, no snow, no trees, no eyes, no skiing, and no female bodily excretions. And being the person I am, I wrote basically an aria to all of those things as my PhD dissertation. All of those things are heavily represented in Cowboys Are My Weakness. And through a series of astonishing events, that book got published by W.W. Norton. I won't tell that story. We'll stick to the Colorado part of the story. But by a series of amazing accidents, that the book got published, and it did very well when I was still in school. I left school, and my agent gave me the check, the money that I had been paid when I sold Cowboys Are My Weakness. It was $21,000. I had been working as a graduate student. I'd been making $4,100 a year as a teaching assistant in graduate school. I left school to basically drive around in my car and camp out when I had never had any money of my own. I had more or less emancipated myself from my parents. We'll get to that part of the story later. So I was literally kind of living in my car, which was a Toyota Corolla, with my dog and my tent, driving around the West, camping. That was that was pretty much the whole story at that time. My agent got me this check for $21,000. When she handed it to me, she said, "Don't spend it all on hiking boots," which was pretty good advice for me at the time. And it was also kind of good parenting advice. And in the absence of good parenting, I took it as such, and I was like, okay, I have to do something big with this money, because what if I never get any more money? Like, what if this is it? This is the $21,000, and I have to do something serious. So I drove around with my dog. I was reading from the newly released book at little independent bookstores all over the West, and checking out where I might want to live, where I might want to put this money down on a piece of property. I drove all over Northern California and Oregon and Washington and Idaho and Montana. And I came back to Colorado actually to do an event that some of you might even attend in Steamboat called the Literary Sojourn. Has anybody ever been to the Literary Sojourn? It's really, I don't know if they're doing it anymore, but it went on for years, and it was an event in a big tent in Steamboat in the fall, and they would have like 20 authors on the same day. It was really fun. And I got invited to that with Cowboys Are My Weakness. And I went there, and that was kind of what took me back to Colorado. I had been living in Colorado between college and graduate school. I'd been living in Winter Park and working as, the 7 ski bum jobs that people do before I decided to get serious and go to graduate school in Utah. So I had lived in Colorado before, and when I was out looking for a place, I thought, well, I don't really want to go back to Colorado. Like, I've had that experience, I loved it, but now I want to do something new. But the Literary Sojourn brought me back to Colorado, and I met 2 other women writers at the Literary Sojourn, and they invited me down to their house in Denver after the Literary Sojourn. And I might have mentioned I was like jobless and living in my car, so I really had no problem accepting their invitation. And so I went to their house, and this is a funny thing that I'll just mention because of tonight. they had Bronco tickets and Rockies tickets. And it was the first season that the Rockies were here. And they were setting the all-time attendance record. Some of you are nodding your heads, so you remember this. It was at Mile High. The games were at Mile High, what was then Mile High. And the Rockies were in last place, and they were playing the Astros, who were in last place, and in their division. And like 77,000 people came because they were gonna set the all-time attendance record. And for someone, I was a lifelong sports fan. My father and I had sports. That's how we got along when we got along. So I thought this was the coolest thing ever. So I went to that like September 27th, whatever it was, Rockies game where they set the attendance record. And then they had Monday night tickets to Broncos Raiders. And this is so not what I usually talk about, but I've got this Denver crowd in here, and you probably all hate sports, but like I was like, this is the greatest state. Like, oh my God, these people are so funny about their sports, and like there were 77,000 people there. The Houston Astros came out on the field, and the Houston Astros were like so far in last place, they had been playing in front of like 7,000 people in Houston. And they came out and they were like looking at and like everybody's cheering. It was the funniest thing. So anyway, I was like, maybe I should stay in Colorado. Like, Colorado's cool. Like maybe I shouldn't have written off Colorado as the place I was looking. So after all that, I went to this game. I went to the game, and then I kind of took 285 out of Denver to just see what I could find on 285. And two other writers, Antonia Nelson and Robert Boswell, had told me that they heard Creed was cool. That was it. Like they were like, they had family property in Telluride, and they were kind of looking at buying like the old post office in Bonanza. But they were like, we heard Creed was cool. So I went to Salida. I did all the things, went to all the places, Fairplay, Salida, looked around at property, went to Creed. I got to Creed, and the first thing that happened is I got invited to a wedding. And at the wedding, I was introduced to three women, young women, who had all had some kind of dream, and they were enacting it in Creed. So one woman opened a fresh flower shop in this town of like 400-ish people. One of them, some of you probably know Jenny Inge, was making jewelry out of silver and horsehair. She's kind of world famous. And then the third one had opened the first like real coffee shop that was making lattes. So keep in mind, this is like 1992, right? And so she's making lattes. So people who've never had a latte are going in there and spending $3 on a latte. And people who have never taken flowers to anybody are going in and buying a handful of flowers to take to somebody when they're going over for dinner. So they told me, they're like, well, if you want to do something, Creed basically supports it. Like, it doesn't really matter what it is. So I thought that was cool. And then, another lady I met at the wedding, a real estate lady, took me out the next day to look at property. Well, I was so young. I mean, I was 30, but I was kind of, in a way, a young 30. And I really didn't know about real estate. Like, I'd never had any money at all. Like, I basically lived on top ramen. And I didn't know, I didn't know you lied to real estate. Like, I didn't know how it went. So I just told everybody the truth. I was like, yeah, I'm living in my car. I've got $21,000. No job. And I have this book and not 3 pages of another one to rub together. And so she took me around and she showed me things that were appropriate to my $21,000, which in 1992 were basically 7 cabins held together with newspaper, and string that the miners left behind, and some 5-acre lots where the wind blew all the time. Like, that was basically what I could afford. And so I thought, okay, no, I'm going on to whatever, Ridgeway, the next town. And she said, you know, I should take you out to see the Blair Ranch. And I said, okay. She's like, no, but single woman living all the way at the end of a 12-mile dirt road, I don't know. And I said, oh, I'd see it. She's like, well, you know, honestly, you can't afford it. So I was like, okay. So we're back in Crete. I'm sitting in my car, ready to go on to the next town. And this guy, this sort of cowboy realtor, belt buckle wearing dude, comes up and he knocks on my window and he says, I hear you want to see the Blair Ranch. And I said, okay. So I get in this truck and out we go to the Blair Ranch, which is this place that you're seeing here. And it was the third week of September, and the aspens were doing their thing to a sort of incredible extent. And it was just the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And there's a photo, I don't know if it's come up yet, but it's a very young me sitting on the fence. And he took that shot that day, like as if it was already mine, you know? And so the price had just come down. It had just been reduced a lot. And with the reduction, my $21,000 represented 4.7% down. And as I said, I didn't know very much about real estate, but I knew that was not good. And like the good thing was, I was 30 years old. I was living in my car. Like, what did I have to lose? You know, not that much. And what the realtor said to me was, you know, Donna Blair, who was the widow who was selling the ranch, Donna Blair's going to like the idea of you. So why don't you give me your 4.7% down and an autographed hardcover of Cowboys Are My Weakness, and I'll see what I can do. And about 10 days later, Donna sold me the ranch for 4.7% down and a book of short stories. And most importantly, she carried the note herself because no bank in the universe would have or should have lent me money. And I think really what happened, looking back on it now as an older woman who tries to inspire younger women to do what they want instead of what they should, I think she was just saying, well, maybe if I believe in her, she'll believe in herself. I didn't know her. I didn't meet her when we signed the paper. I have met her many times now. But it wasn't like she knew me. I mean, she knew me because she read my stories. But anyway, so I bought this ranch, which was insane. It was an insane thing to do. I didn't have a job. I might have said that like 4 times. And all of a sudden, I had these great big mortgage payments because she may have like carried the note, but she didn't carry it that far. Like it was a 20-year mortgage. 20-year mortgage with 4.7% down. Now, someone who's cynical in the audience is saying she thought she was going to get that ranch back, which might be true, but I don't think so. I don't think that's true. In any case, then I just had to learn to hustle. And I wrote anything anybody would pay me money to write. I wrote ridiculous articles for money. I wrote an article about why Clint Eastwood is my hero. I wrote an article about women in their 20s getting plastic surgery to combat the signs of aging. I wrote absurd things that I do not believe in any way. Clint Eastwood, for instance, is not my hero. But I'm not sorry because I really did learn how to hustle, and I learned how to make a living, and I learned how to care for something outside myself and something that needed caring for. This land needed caring for. It had been vacant for about 20 years. And in return, the land grew me up and it gave me a safe place to be. I had a rough childhood. Both my parents were alcoholics, and my father was violent. My father broke my femur when I was 4. and I was in a body cast for most of that year, a 3/4 body cast. And I had never felt like I had a home or a safe place to be. And then I made this my safe place, and it took care of me as I was taking care of it. I knew nothing about how to own a ranch. I knew nothing about sweeping a chimney or fixing a fence. You know, I didn't know hot water didn't just come out of the wall. I was so ill-equipped to own this ranch, but it also taught me how to ask for help. And I asked for help from my neighbors and from friends and other landowners. I would learn how to listen in conversations to all the stuff I was supposed to be doing every year. When I would go to town, I don't have children. I didn't want children. I didn't want to pass on my genetic code. And I also was really honestly having sort of too good a life to pause and have children. But in a way, like, this ranch grew me up the way having kids grows some people up. Like, it made me responsible to something big where there were real consequences if I didn't get the work done, basically. And so it made me an adult. It made me an adult, and it also gave me a sense of home, which I had never had, and all of that is really important to me. 2 more things to say about the ranch, and then I'm going to read you a little bit. I paid off the ranch. I paid off Donna Blair. I drove her last payment during the West Fork fire. She was in town. She still comes in the summer. Sometimes she has another house in Crete. And it was just like that. It was like ash was falling on the car, and I had to drive through 2 roadblocks to get to her house. And I literally handed her the last check, like, with my fiction writer's mind going, okay, if I pay this off today, is that going to make the ranch more or less likely to burn down? Like, trying to think about the plot of the novel. But it didn't burn down, just the mountain behind it. And the other thing to say, another weird coincidence of timing, is that, the ranch protected me, and it took care of me, and I wanted to take care of it. And so I was able, in 2019, to put the ranch in a land trust, in a land conservation. So it is now protected forever. I mean, as long as there's Colorado and as long as there's the United States. So we keep our fingers crossed about that these days. But it is protected. And the weird thing about all that requires an enormous amount of paperwork from a whole bunch of different people. There's like the mineral person and the surveyor and the this and that. All these people have to coordinate and get their paperwork in. And the crazy thing was, all the paperwork was finally in the day that Deep Creek was published, like the day that I left on tour. And so literally the last thing I did before I went to the Denver airport for like 2 months of touring was sign the papers to protect it. So that felt really beautiful. The ranch is full of that kind of thing. It's like a place that makes crazy, serendipitous, positive stuff happen. So I am going to read a chapter called The Season of Hunkering Down, since we are coming into the season of hunkering down. And then we can talk. By the 1st of October, the aspens are done showing off for the year. First dusting of snow on the peaks, then first dusting of snow on the pasture. The color is almost gone, and with it the tourists. My neighbors from the Sourd Ranch have moved into town for the winter. For the next 7 months, I'll be the last occupied house on my road. The horses hang around the corral, looking a little grim. They know what's coming. I'm just back from a 14-day research trip to the Eastern Canadian Arctic on an icebreaker, and 3 separate weeks teaching on the island of Ile de Ré off the Atlantic coast of France, on a 140-year-old schooner out of Rockport, Maine, and at the Omega Institute in the beautiful Hudson Valley. I have 2 weeks at the ranch before I have to leave again. I've all but missed this year's color change in the high country, so even though there's much to be done to prepare for winter, this morning Fenton, William, and I take a hike up to Phoenix Park, one of the most wind-protected places in the valley, hoping to find a few groves of aspens still holding their leaves. We climb for an hour in light drizzle, and under my boot soles is a carpet of green and gold. We surprise a mule deer buck, a 4-pointer, at the place where the forest gives way to meadow. When we reach the waterfall at the top of the park, the sun peeks through the clouds just long enough to turn the whole scene Kodachrome. The heavy gunmetal sky, the ghost aspens with only a fraction of their leaves left glowing like a fluorescent pencil sketch beneath it, the water tumbling down the face of the cliff, beads of it lit up against the dark rock and spinning earthward like fireflies. In the summertime, this trail sees a fair amount of use, from hikers and horsemen, sometimes four-wheelers, and even the occasional 4x4 truck. But summer feels long over, and we are between hunting seasons, so the dogs and I have the place to ourselves. Years ago, on an August hike, right at the tail end of the monsoon, I got caught in a thunderstorm halfway across the big meadow that leads to Phoenix Park. I was new to the valley and had not yet learned how a bright white micropuff in one corner of the sky can morph into a cumulonimbic monster in the amount of time it takes to go around a couple of bends in the trail. If you've never gotten caught in a thunderstorm at high altitude, if you've never felt your long, straight hair stand on end as if someone above you has strings attached to it, if you have never smelled sulfur in the air just before a crack you can feel at the center of your rib cage splits the sky in two, if you have never run between lightning bolts that are hitting the ground on every side of you, your brain racing to determine whether you will improve or diminish your odds of surviving if you take 5 seconds to unbuckle your pack and throw its contents, including your stainless steel water bottle, to the ground, then you might not understand what a pleasure it is to hike that same trail in October on a cool, dry day where the odds of a thunderstorm, while not impossible, are about 10,000 to 1. After a snack and a long drink out of that same time-tested steel water bottle, the dogs and I make our way back down the trail, smelling not sulfur, but the slow rot of dying leaves in a dry climate and the occasional tang of pine pitch. An immature bald eagle rides a thermal down canyon, and it's windless enough that I can hear sun-warmed rocks, newly freed from last night's frost, slip and settle in the big scree field across the creek that rises up toward Wasson Park. In the house I grew up in, fall marked the start of the most dangerous season. My mother dreaded the snow and ice and the perpetually gray skies of a mid-Atlantic winter. Either she never learned how to buy a serious winter coat or her vanity wouldn't allow it. She played indoor tennis, but the reservations were expensive and in high demand, so she didn't get enough exercise for her to justify the few food calories a day she normally ingested, and her perpetual hunger was the loudest thing in our house. The shortening days meant she drank more and started earlier. By the end of September, she was headed into a tailspin from which she would not emerge until the crocuses came up in the spring. By the time my mother died in 1993, the drug Prozac had been taken by more than 10 million people. And yet I don't believe the word depression had ever been uttered in my childhood home until once, during fall break of my junior year of college, I told my mother I had started taking advantage of Denison's free psychological services. A boy I had befriended from my geology class was showing strong self-destructive tendencies. He had just left a severed pig's head in the ice machine in one of the all-female dorms, and I'd made the appointment hoping to get advice on how I might help him. After giving me advice, the therapist, a kind, smart, and soft-spoken man by the name of Jeff Pollard, asked simply, "And how are you feeling these days?" I felt my body go utterly still for the count of 1, 2, 3, and then I burst into sobs that lasted upwards of 10 minutes. I can still feel that office around me as if it were yesterday. The leather books, tall ceilings, and high windows through which I could see all the trees on the quad ablaze in fall color. I can still feel my dawning understanding that therapy was a thing that had been invented to, among other applications, help people who had suffered exactly the sorts of things I had suffered at the hands of my father. Even then, it had taken many sessions for Dr. P to convince me it was okay to accept that help. My mother and I were driving back from an unsuccessful trip to the mall. I had arrived at my parents' house wearing a peasant blouse and a long, colorful, hand-painted skirt I'd bought for more than I could afford at an art fair. She said the skirt made me look fat, and we'd go buy something she could stand to look at me in. I had fended off several pencil skirts and dart-heavy blouses, as well as a few items designed by Liz Claiborne. We hadn't exactly stopped speaking to each other, so after 10 minutes of car silence, I decided to tell her about Dr. P. He says I suffer from PTSD, which manifests in bouts of depression and low-level anxiety, but the good news is he doesn't think I'll need drugs. He thinks the talking will work. My mother kept her eyes on the road, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch slightly. I wasn't sure about it at first, I said, but now each week I find myself looking forward to the hour I spend in his office. I fiddled with my seatbelt. Dr. P says I'm learning to hear the sound of my own voice. Depression, huh? My mother said, louder than I expected. I'd been hoping she'd ask me what the letters PTSD stood for. You know what we did for depression when I was your age? Drank, I managed not to say. Drank, she said, her eyes shooting to the car clock, confirming that we were, in fact, at least 30 minutes past cocktail hour. Back at the ranch after our hike, I give a couple of hours to one of the larger fall projects, coating the exterior logs with UV protector. At 9,000 feet at this latitude, the UV eats through everything over the course of a summer: paint, plastic, enamel, and if I don't protect them every fall, the logs themselves. The instructions on the giant can warn it takes the coating 24 hours to seal correctly, and during that 24 hours, it must not encounter rain, dew, or temperatures below 40 degrees. It almost always gets below 40 degrees at the ranch at night, except sometimes in July during the monsoon. However bad cold is for the sealant, I feel certain half an inch of rain in 45 minutes would be worse. If we are not in a drought year, it dews heavily every night until everything freezes solid. Given the impossibility of following the instructions on the can, I slap some coating onto the logs in the heat of every afternoon and hope to get the whole house covered before the snow flies. The air at the ranch is thin, dry, and cold, and the snowstorms get stuck in the dip and swirl of the basin, turning back and back again on themselves, sometimes dropping as much as 4 inches an hour. On any given morning from the 1st of October on out, I might wake to frozen ground and flurries. By dinner time, the split rail fences might have all gone under, and I might not see the tops of them again until March. That will be the day that launches 4 solid months of worry. For my elderly geldings, DeSeo and Roni, who get so stiff standing on that frozen moonscape with their achy old man legs, they sometimes won't eat, won't even take the short walk to the water trough. For the mini donkeys, Simon and Isaac, who are far younger than the horses but no taller than the split rail fences. In the biggest blizzards, they have to power through the pasture like Tonka trucks, leaving their belly marks in the fresh powder. I spend too many hours imagining them high-centered in a drift some howling night, their little legs spinning and spinning but gaining no purchase at all. I worry about my Icelandic sheep, especially Jordan, my best ewe, who has a healthy lamb of her own each year and is always willing to nurse the orphans. She's prone to respiratory illness brought on by sudden cold snaps. I worry about my chickens who tend to attack one another in extreme weather of any kind. But what edges out the worry, of course, is the wonder, because what could be better than 48 inches in 24 hours? Then a couple of Irish wolfhounds leaping through bottomless powder with giant smiles on their faces. Then a herd of 200 elk making their stately way chest-deep in the snowbound pasture toward the river. Best of all, what accompanies each snowstorm is the knowledge that the aquifer is getting replenished, that summer wildfire fear is assuaged, if not abated, that the rivers will be full of trout and the pastures full of flowers come July. The autumn I was 25, I flew from graduate school in Utah to my parents' house in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, something I did with relative consistency up until my mother died. Downstairs in the TV room, my father and I were watching the Phillies get beat up by the Mets when the phone rang and my mother answered it upstairs. A few minutes later, we heard her banging around with some fervor. My father leaned toward me, said, "Go see what your mother's up to, will you?" In her bedroom, she was packing a small suitcase. "What's going on?" I asked her. "That was Jean," my mother said, without looking at me. "Jean as in your sister?" I asked. In the quarter century I had been on the planet, I had maybe heard my mother say her sister's name 5 times. "Yeah," she said, "my father's dying in a hospital in Florida, and he says he wants to shake my hand." I looked at my mother for signs of fracture, but as she gathered her makeup into a little cloth case with red foxes printed on it, she seemed exactly as she had been before. If my mother had mentioned Jean 5 times in my life, it was 5 more times than she had talked about her father. The story I'd been told was that on the very same day my mother's mother died in childbirth, her father abandoned the girls. Aunt Ermy and Uncle Marion, who had never wanted anything to do with children, agreed to raise them. Less than a year after my mother ran away to Broadway, Jean joined her as a way to get out of their sad and angry house. They had a sister act at first and eventually went abroad with USO. Even though Jean was older, my mother had always been the wilder sister. When showbiz got too unruly for Jean, she returned to Spiceland, Indiana, found religion, and married her high school sweetheart. My mother had told me, but only once, that Jean never forgave my mother for corrupting her, for luring her to the big city, tarnishing her reputation, and ruining her life. The sisters stopped speaking when Jean returned to Indiana, and as far as my father or I knew, this was the first time Jean had made contact in more than 40 years. "So what are you going to do?" I asked, though the suitcase was making the answer apparent. "I'm going down there," she said. "I've never laid eyes on the man, and this is my last chance." "You want me to go with you?" I said, "or drive you to the airport?" Something about her matter-of-fact tone scaring me a little. No, stay here. Get your father to take you out to dinner. I won't be gone that long." The next day, at nearly the same hour, the Mets taking it to the Phillies once again, my father and I heard the garage door open. My mother climbed the stairs without glancing in our direction, and my father indicated with his head. By the time I got to her room, she was already unpacking. "How'd it go?" I asked her. "What happened?" She looked at me as if I were crazy. "What do you think happened?" she said. I shook his hand. And with that, she turned back to her suitcase. I went downstairs to watch the 9th inning. A few minutes later, we heard her in the kitchen, starting dinner, humming one of her old Torch songs, mixing herself a drink. I finished coating nearly the entire west side of the house with an hour to go before sunset. If I extend my ladder fully and stand on the second step from the top, I can reach all but the 4 logs closest to the peak, and those logs are protected from the worst of the sun's rays by the roof's eaves anyway. Because I have not successfully taught William to dial 911, I leave it each year at that. Tomorrow I will get on the roof with a coarse bristled round brush and the series of screw-in poles that allow me to sweep my chimney. I will force that brush from the top of the chimney all the way down into the basement and scrub for all I am worth for a good 20 minutes. Then I will climb down from the roof with my face and arms blackened by soot, relatively secure in the knowledge that if this turns out to be the winter that ends all winters, at least we have begun it clean and creosote-free. About 6 months and 4 cords of wood from now, there will be an April night so warm it will seem like overkill to build a fire. The next morning, I will open the windows to air out my bedroom and closet. I will hear the hum and whir of the automatic pump in the basement as it gets to work on the water that has inevitably seeped inside as 120 acres of snow turns to liquid and then tries to displace itself. I will trade my snowshoes for my extra toughs because almost overnight the pasture will have turned from mostly snow to mostly muck. As I zigzag across it, trying to stay out of the deepest mud, I will spot a flash of blue so simultaneously bright and deep it won't quite make sense in this late winter color scheme of bare branches, dusky clouds, and dirty ice. The Rocky Mountain bluebirds will have arrived, only the males at first, scouting my pasture for a nesting place. I'll watch the bluebirds flit along the fence line, hear the warble high and clear, and I'll know the 35 below zero nights are over, that there will be one more big dump of snow so heavy the horses will go on a water strike rather than slog through it to the trough, but it will melt in a matter of days. And before too long, there will be tiny buds on the aspen trees, the ice-choked river will run free again, and a green so subtle I think I might be imagining it will tint first the yard, then the pasture. The horses' spines will relax all the way to their tails, the chickens will venture out of their coop, and even the coyotes' barks will seem lazier, a little less hungry, a little less lonely. The wild iris will push up through the soil, and the roan, whose winter coat is burgundy wine, will shed out to a bright, barely speckled gray. In a matter of weeks, the paint-by-number landscape will have filled in around that first flash of blue, pale green aspen leaf, crimson paintbrush, purple lupin, red-tailed hawk. A few days after we talked about depression, you turn the lights on. A few days after we talked about depression, my mother came into my room while I was sleeping, took the hand-painted skirt out of my closet, washed it in hot water, took the waistband in, and then returned it without a word. When I went to put it on for my return flight, all of the beautiful colors were muted, and it was a length that had never been and would never be in style. I put my jeans back on and stuck my head in her bedroom with the skirt in my hand. Why can't you like me the way I am? I leaned against the door jamb, trying to look calm. There were rules against such questions in my household, and I knew it. Is that the kind of thing they teach you to say in therapy, she said. I guess maybe it is, I said. Her eyes were focused, as usual, on herself in her makeup mirror. I gave up everything I loved for you, she said, for maybe the 500 millionth time. I'm sorry, I said, and I was. There were so many things that made my mother sad. The weather, my wardrobe, the choices she made, most notably, it turned out, having me. I want to write here that I understand, that I know she did her best, that there was no one in her early life to teach her how to love, how to take responsibility, how to be something other than a victim of the circumstances life had dealt her. And as I write the words, I can see that they are true. But the other thing I need to say is this. For all of my childhood and throughout my teens, I prayed to have myself sucked right back up into the ether because I thought it might give my mother back her hopes and dreams and joy. But the universe wouldn't make that trade with me. And so my mother died, drunk and unhappy. And I found my way to this ranch, this place where I protect and am protected by animals, this place where nature controls how I spend my days and how I spend my life, this place where I can love every season. When the sun sets tonight, the temperature will drop in 30 minutes from 55 to 38. They are calling for a cold front to move through the valley, and if they are right, tonight we'll get our first truly hard frost. I've got a pot of green chili stew on simmer, and the dogs are snoring by the wood stove. There's nothing I would trade this for. Now, let it snow. Thank you for indulging me. I haven't done that in a long time. You know, it's been a little while since the book came out, so that was kind of fun for me. I'm happy to answer questions. really about anything at all that I've said or anything I haven't said.
I just wondered, who takes care of the ranch and the animals when you're gone?
The question was who takes care of the ranch and the animals when I'm gone. Luckily, I teach in 2 graduate programs, and I have no shortage of young people who are maybe done with grad school and need a place to finish their books. And so I have a series of students of various kinds who come for 6 months or a year or 3 months or 2 weeks. And I train them how to take care of the animals, and they do it. And, you know, I knew when I got the ranch that I wasn't meant to have it just by myself. And they may not have a lot of experience with certain kinds of animals, but I really didn't have any experience with hardly any animals, and we all survived. So, as long as, I mean, the question I always ask them, I say, are you willing to look into Livy's eyes and tell me if she's feeling okay? Like, that's the stuff that matters to me. Like, if you miss one of the supplements for the horse, like, whatever, like, nobody's going to die over that. So that's how I've done it. And it's worked out great because lots of people have gotten their books written there, or they've gotten their life figured out there, or they've broken up with their shitty boyfriend because of their time there, or whatever. And I mean, there's one catastrophe of a house sitter, which I write about in Deep Creek. I've been more careful choosing since then. I just want to say that his mother was great, and then his mother couldn't come back the next winter, and she offered him up. That's how I made that mistake. I'm usually quite careful, but I loved her so much, I thought her son would be great. Anyway, you have to read the book to figure out what I'm saying. But in any case, overall, it's been a win-win-win-win for everybody. And I think the people who get to stay there have a mini experience, you know, that I've had with it. It's a very, very healing place. It's healing ground, and anyone who's there, even for a couple days, can feel it. Other questions? Yeah.
Is it working? Okay. So Creed is a small community. We did go and saw the Repertory Theater.
Nice.
So you must have some help, or your neighbors there in the small community. Imagine they're very supportive.
Yes. There are some people who are very supportive. There are also some people who don't, you know, Creed has gotten a little polarized, like everywhere, since Trump was elected. And so I get death threats in Creed occasionally, not really since around the 2020 election. But no, I mean, there's people who appreciate the fact that I'm there, and there's people who can't stand the fact that I'm there, just like any town, honestly. You know, my neighbors were super helpful when I first got there. I mean, I'm not talking about like my next door neighbors, but like the other people in the community were super helpful when I didn't know what I was doing. And I mean, honestly, this is the truth. I'll just say it. I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone, but like Creed was a place that's quite conservative, like most of Southern Colorado, but it has the theater, and it was a place where artists could feel comfortable, where queer people could feel comfortable. The occasional person of color could feel comfortable, not that they come very much. And then it changed when Trump was elected, and it got less, it got more divisive. So there are people who wish I wasn't there, and there are people who are happy that I'm there. You know, it's like really like anywhere, but it's slightly magnified because it's a much smaller community. Also, you know, people have, like, I was respected because I did the work, but I was also distrusted because I leave all the time. And that's just how it was going to be. That's nobody's fault. That's just the line of thinking. And I do leave all the time, you know. I do leave all the time. And then I come back, and then I leave, and then I come back. And that's what I do. And so, you know, that is, I mean, it's not like I leave for the winter, you know, I'm not like a snowbird. I love being there in the dead of winter. That's my favorite time there. My favorite time there is December and January. And that also corresponds with when I have the most time off. So I can actually be there in December and January, and I love it. I really don't like the summer there. That's when I don't like it because of all the four-wheelers. I mean, it's like, it's a plague of four-wheelers. Like, you can't do anything without 1,000 four-wheelers stirring up dust. It's really terrible. There's so many four-wheelers, and there didn't used to be. They used to all be in Lake City, but now they're in Crete. And it's really a bummer. And so I'm always happy to be gone in the summer. But the other seasons, I quite like it there. Even mud season, I like okay. But I love the dead of winter. Like, I always think, in the summer, I always think, okay, I got to get out of here, and I got to go live somewhere where people think like I do, something like that in the summer. And then winter comes, and I'm like, no, I'm not leaving. I'm staying here forever. And it's really very schizophrenic that way. I don't do great there in the summer. Yes?
How are the horses? They got to be getting pictures.
Well, Roni passed, the Roan of the photos. He had, I have to tell you this, he had a good death, you know, like if there's such a thing as a good death, he had one. He had like so much love his last summer, which we figured was his last summer. And then in September, like he literally, like DeSeo, my alarm clock, like was winning and winning and winning, and I went running out there in the dark, and he took me to Roni, and Roni was down, and he waited for me and Mike to get there, and he put his head in Mike's lap, and he died. Like, it couldn't have been any more beautiful. And he was 41. So he had a really good run. And he really had a pretty good summer up until then. And then DeSeo's still alive, unbelievably. He's almost died twice, but he comes back. And then I have a big quarter horse named Ben, who like was a big guy who needed a home during COVID, and I'm kind of a sucker for big guys. He looks so big you can't imagine that he's just a quarter horse. He looks like a thoroughbred quarter horse cross. He's dark bay with a big splash of white paint on his shoulder. He's so handsome, and he's kind of trouble, but he keeps everybody lively. And then the donkeys, you know, still going strong. As they do, running the show. Yes?
Do we need to worry?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm not in charge of calling. I forgot.
You need the microphone because otherwise the questions aren't recorded.
That's right. So we'll do you next, but she's going to go.
What are you writing now, and when will it be out?
I'm not writing anything. Well, that's not true. I don't have a project that's close. I judged the National Book Award this year, and it's a monumental task. I read 580 books this year. And that doesn't even make sense to you. It wouldn't have made sense to me. Like, if you had said to me, I read 50 books this summer, I would be like, wow, that's a lot. But 580, you just can't even see it, right? You can't even get your hands around it. So I just did that, and it was wonderful. I read 580 books, and we picked 10 of them, and it was awesome. It was 5 of us picked 10 books out of that 580, and it was a great thing to do. It was so much more fun than writing, you know? It really was. I have a book of short stories that's close, I guess, when I really go back in and hit it, but I haven't. Because we just made the short list last night, so we're just at the end of the National Book Award process. And then I have an idea for a novel, but it might be just a few short stories that finish off this collection that I've been working on for a long time. And then I've been asked, I wrote this little book with Amy Irvine called Airmail. We did this book prior to the 2020 election to try to see if we could make some small difference in that. And now I've been asked to do another one myself prior to the 2024 election. It'll just be another little book like that from Torrey House. And So it won't take me a long time to write it, but I got my first period the month that Roe v. Wade was ratified. So I'm going to write a little story about that. I'm going to write another little political book about female bodily autonomy. And that will come out in probably May before the 2024 election. So I don't have to get on that right now. It won't be due for me until January of 2024. But I signed a contract for that. No?
Thank you for your talk this evening. You describe your arriving in Creed and settling in Creed as almost a serendipitous collection of events. Can you imagine that if it hadn't been Creed, that there was someplace else, perhaps not even in Colorado, where you might have found the same sort of solace that you found there?
Yeah, I think so. I never, I tend to think, the great Joan Didion line, we tell ourselves stories in order to live, right? So, this is the story I tell. It's true, but it could have been another place. I skipped this part because I talked about the Broncos for so long, but I went to Winthrop, Washington, and I actually put $500 of my $21,000 down as earnest money on a little 40-acre parcel of land in Winthrop. So my very first idea was Winthrop, Washington. And then when I got to Creed, I just let that money go. But it was only a few months before. I thought Winthrop, Washington was it, but it wasn't the same at all. I just thought, oh, this is pretty, and there's hiking. It wasn't anything like the same kind of feeling I had when I got to Creed. But had I wound up in Winthrop, Washington, sure. What I needed was a place that was mine. What I say in here, when I wrote Cowboys Are My Weakness, that was a very young person's book, but it was a book about coming out west and falling completely in love with the Western landscape, girl from New Jersey, feeling like I belonged here much more than there, but also thinking that I sort of needed that Western guy, not the cowboy per se, but the river guide or the hunting guide or the forest ranger who I wound up marrying, or whatever, that I needed that man to translate the Western landscape for me. And what my narrator in Cowboys, my fictional narrator in Cowboys, learns is that she can kind of have her own relationship with the land. She doesn't really need it to be translated for her. And that was the thing about the book. even now, young women who read that book, they're like, oh, I figured out, I didn't have to talk my boyfriend into taking me backcountry skiing or whatever. That was the thing about that book that resonated with so many women in particular, but also lots of people. And then the ranch, I tell a story in this book where, I say I finally figured out I could be the cowboy. It's what I needed to do was get deep into a piece of land that could feel like home, that I could care for and could care for me. And if that had happened in Montana or Wyoming or whatever, it would have been fine. However, that is not to say that Colorado and Creed isn't very special to me. It's very special. It's the story of my life. So it's really hard to even do the thought exercise of what if this were Wyoming or what if it were Montana, because it wasn't. It was Creed. And when Creed presented itself to me, it was so obvious. Everything about that whole exchange. Are you kidding? She sold me that ranch for 4.7% down, and I didn't have a job. I didn't have a job. And I didn't say this earlier, but I also didn't have a PhD because they were mean to me and I walked out. So it was an insane thing to do. And yet I did it. And then it worked out. So that in and of itself means Creed was the right place, or this ranch was the right place, or Donna Blair was the right person, you know? And, you know, I don't know. Like, I've been looked after somehow. You know, I had a rough start, but I've been looked after somehow. I'm just going to say that. I was just on this boat in Greenland. Do you know who Lawrence Krauss is? Lawrence Krauss is a famous atheist, scientist. And his friend, he has a good friend named Richard Dawkins, who maybe you've heard of, who believes he scientifically disproved the existence of God. And I don't want to say anything about God right now, but imagine the ego that would allow you to think that you could scientifically disprove the existence of God. Like, what would be the odds that in September of 2022, just accidentally, we knew everything? Like, wouldn't that be funny? Like, wouldn't that be funny if just this is it? There's nothing else. Like, didn't they learn from margarine? Like, I don't understand. I don't understand. So anyway, I wound up sort of accidentally on this boat with this Lawrence Krauss, who's like a black hole guy, and 40 of his followers who called themselves followers and who kneeled at his feet. He's also a sexual predator. He's banned from 3 campuses. This whole thing was like, this would only happen to me, right? Like I would wind up in Greenland with these egomaniac people. Anyway, what was I going to say about that? I was going to say something. I've been looked after. Yes. So I don't know why I brought up Lawrence Krauss. I can't stop thinking about him. But he's so disgusting. But in any case, like, I think faith is such a personal thing, and I also think it's like, when I say personal, I don't mean that in the generic way. I mean, I think we all sort of make up our own faith as we go along, you know, and I have my own idea, but I really do believe, contrary to Lawrence Krauss, that something is taking care of me, because my God, like, I never should have gotten out of my father's house alive, you know, but I did. And then these series of things, and, you know, part of that's because I'm a yes-sayer. I know that. I'm a yes-sayer, and people like yes-sayers, and they want to create opportunities for, you know, for me to say yes. And so I do, and I'm still a yes-sayer. That's why I'm here. Flew all the way from Iceland, and here I am. I'm a yes-sayer. But anyway, I do think, you know, like, in a way, yes, I could have had a wonderful life in another state. On the other hand, like, everything aligned for me to wind up in Creed. I mean, to a ridiculous extent. I had no job. You know, I walked out of my PhD program with 3 months to go. Like, I did a lot of things that were not by the book. And, you know, and she believed in me and carried the note. And I made every payment. She always says, you know, she makes those payments, and on time, she used to say when she came to town. And when I paid her off during the fire, which was a very emotional time, of course, for all of us, she said, I have to tell you that this is the most satisfactory business transaction of my life. Yeah. She was cool. She is cool. She was like, she's a Texas lady, you know. She lived in Dallas most of the time. She was like a total Texas lady. And then you just thought you knew everything about her. And then you'd say, how are you, Don? And she's like, oh, I just got back from Yemen. I'd be like, Yemen? Like she had, you know, little tchotchkes all over her, little teddy bears, you know, carved out of wood. And she'd be like, yeah, I was in Yemen. I was like, well, how long? She's like, 6 or 8 months. Like, I was like, wow, what were you doing in Yemen? Like, you know, maybe she was part of the witness protection. I got no idea, but she is. I haven't seen her since I paid off the ranch, since the West Fork fire. But she was something. She was powerful little woman. I mean, little in stature, big in heart and soul. Yeah.
And it kind of takes you a different direction, but you've had a lot of experiences traveling, and those experiences just kind of just happened to you. probably because you're in the situation of teaching and meeting many different people. I'd like you to speak just a little bit about all those experiences.
Well, I'll say one thing just to start, which isn't exactly about travel. I've been really lucky the last 10 years to teach at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and that was another thing that happened completely accidentally. Somebody didn't show up at the last minute, and the director knew I was drivable to Santa Fe, and I've been there 10 years now. And that has been the education of my life. There are 116 different nations represented in the student body, and learning so much about those cultures and also my own whiteness and our country's history as regards Native populations. Like, that's been a super fantastic education for me. You know, not always easy and not always happy, but I love my job there, and I feel very proud, honestly, that they trust me with their stories, the students there. And then I also teach at UC Davis, and I have a variety of amazing students there, likewise, that they trust me with their stories. So that's really, if you want to say to me, like, what have you learned about people? Like, that's where I learn about people the most, because these students are writing their memoirs, or they're writing their novels, or they're writing the stories of their family or their history, and that's a real honor to hold that work. In terms of travel, you know, I've always believed in, like, travel as opening my mind, and whether it's, you know, it really doesn't matter whether it's like Bhutan or the Deep South. Like, it's about, I wrote a book called Contents May Have Shifted, which actually is about, like, going from place to place and picking up something that I can have and hold and use in all the places I've been fortunate enough to be. And yeah, so is that more or less an answer to your question? Yeah. Now you're going to ask it anyway.
Well, I don't know. How were you strong enough, or what is it about you that you were able to be with your 91-year-old father? I mean, a man who's got to hate so much because of what he did to you. How did you do that?
Yeah, no. I understand the question, because when I was on tour, people asked me that a lot, like, why were you watching baseball with your father after he did all those things to you? And I do understand that question. Like, I do understand that that's a question that maybe I don't answer in the book. And the only reason I didn't answer it was because I thought it was kind of self-evident. And the first time I was asked that on tour, you know, when I was first out with the book, because you never know what people are going to respond to. So the first few nights on tour, it's like, whoa, didn't see that one coming. But lots of people have asked me a question like that. And what I said the very first time was the right answer. I said, like, if he walked in the door right now, which he won't because he is no longer on the earth, but if he walked in the door right now, like, I would try to make him laugh. I would say something about the Rockies. You know, I would say something about sports to please him. And I would hope that he looked around the room and thought, wow, like, she made something of herself. Look at all these people. Like, all of it, none of that ever goes away. And I think that's okay, you know? Like, my father, like, he was an abuser and he broke my femur. But he had wonderful qualities, you know? He was funny. I got my sense of humor from him. He was smart, and he never really had a chance in life to use. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't, you know, Toni Morrison said there are good bad men and bad good men. It all depends on what you hold dear. And, you know, my father was a good bad man or a bad good man, depending on the day, you know? And so, like, I don't mean that I wish he would walk in the door, because I don't. But if he did, I would, like, sit down and watch a baseball game with him. That's what I would do, because that was what we could do without killing each other. or without, we never, it was never out in the open, but you know what I mean? So, and I don't think that's wrong, I don't think I should be like, I don't think I would be stronger if I had cut him out completely. I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I don't think so.
It's remarkable. I just think it's remarkable.
How have you found that your risk-taking has inspired other people?
Just in the back, when I was cooling off for a minute, when you were all sitting in here, I got a text from this young woman who really, really wanted to take my class at the Zapata Ranch up by the sand dunes, but she had never, ever, interacted with a horse in any way. And I was just come on, you'll be fine. And so that was in July, and she rode all week, and we finally got her to canter. And she just sent me, while I was sitting back there, 2 ribbons from her first horse show. And it's just the greatest thing. It makes me so happy. I could honestly cry that Mary Johnson is riding horses now. So that's the most recent example. I really believe that my goal right now, for the rest of my life, whatever time I have left, is to encourage young people, especially women, but not exclusively women, to do whatever they want to, whatever they want to do. If it's have kids, right? Or if it's climb Everest, or if it's to, be an Icelandic horse guide for a summer, or if it's to get a job on an expedition ship. I want to hold a space where young women can believe in themselves. That's what I want to do more than anything else. More than write another book, more than go to Namibia. I want to do that thing. And so I do think at times it has, the fact that I did a I did a 6-day trip in June in Iceland. I'm in love with Iceland. And it was 6 days, I'm not kidding, of galloping a horse with 63 loose horses. This is what I did in June. I went to Iceland. I signed up for this trip. There were 15 riders, 63 loose horses, no fences, no boundaries. We went up into the highlands, and because it was the first trip of the year, the horses were fresh, so they ran. And we had to go at the pace of the herd. That was the whole point, was to keep up with the herd. So I galloped a horse for 8 hours for 6 days. Now, that's a bit of a stretch, because sometimes we were tolting. I'm trying to learn how to say that in Icelandic. Tolting, basically, is the word. But we were never walking, because the Icelanders don't believe in walking a horse. There's no reason to walk ever. So I did this. I was 60. I turned 60, and then I did this. I couldn't move. There wasn't enough Advil in the world for me to be able to get on that horse the next day. But it was the best week. It might have been the best week I ever had. And if anyone had really described it to me at the beginning, I would have been like, oh, I can't do that. I'm too old. I'm too sore. I had long COVID. I'm not strong enough. I had to literally get help. I had to position the horse, and these horses are short. I had to position the horse where I was I had the slight uphill advantage, because you gallop for 2 hours, and then you get off and you change horses, and then you get on a different horse, and then you gallop for 2 hours, and then you change horses. It's unbelievable. It is such organized chaos. It was the best time. And I want everyone to feel that. It doesn't have to be that, but I want everyone to feel that, because we're not getting out of here, we're not getting out of here. So that's what I want. I want people to do things that create wonder for them. And I'm doing more of that these days. Yeah. So that's what I want. So I don't want to talk anybody into riding an Icelandic horse per se, right? Or kayaking or whatever, kayaking in Greenland. But I want them to do their kayaking in Greenland. And so I try to help them say out loud what their thing is. And then I push them toward it.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Pam.